Hey guys, this lecture is basically a theoretical lecture. I'm going to discuss the different elements of the user interface of QGIS, and then it's going to be followed by a practical lecture where we use a real data set and then go through all the different parts of the user interface. For those of you coming from ArcGIS, ArcMap interface, the interface looks very familiar. After installing the software, you end up with 7 elements. The first element is the map viewer, just as you would have in ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro. The second element is a table of contents, exactly like ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro. The third element is the browser, which resembles in a way Arc Catalog window in ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro. The fourth element is a processing toolbox, which looks like the toolbox in ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro. And then you have the fifth element, which is the main menu and the standard toolbars. These are not all the toolbars that come with the software, but when you install the software for the first time, you have like 4 toolbars open. You can always open the remaining toolbars at will by right-clicking on the header here. You just right-click and you can get a list of the panels and toolbars that are available for you to open. Now that again resembles exactly what you can do in ArcMap. The 7th element of the user interface is a collection of buttons in the status bar. They start with the system messages here. If you click on this button, you will get all the feedback you get from the system, like error messages, warning messages, and so on. If you click on this button here, you can change the projection system, the default projection system of the project that you are working on. Now, it displays here a code, and that is the projection code, projection system code, which is according to the European Petroleum Study Group, which is or has become really a standard. So you can identify projection systems by their EPSG projection code. So if you want to change this code, you just click on this and you will get the dialog box that will enable you to change the default projection system. After that, you have a checkbox, a render checkbox, which basically, if it's checked, then you will get, whenever you pan or zoom, you get the whole map in all the details, all the small details in the coastline or the administrative boundaries and so on. Now, if your map is too heavy and you are trying to be more efficient, you can uncheck this box. And in this case, it's not going to redraw the whole map in all its details every time you pan or zoom. After that, you have the rotation box. Now, in the rotation box, you can actually rotate the map. So sometimes, if you are working on an area of interest that is rotated 45 degrees from the north, and you want to make your map more rectangular, you might want to rotate all your work 45 degrees or similar. The magnifier, after that, the box of the magnifier, where you can enter a percentage. If it's 100%, that means that whenever you zoom to layer, you will get the extent of the layer will fill in the map viewer window. If you put 200%, that means that if you say zoom to layer, only 25% of your layer will be filling the map viewer. If you put 50% here in the magnifier box, you will get your map. If you right click and click zoom to layer, your map will occupy 25% of the extent. After that, you have the scale box. And here you can check the scale of your current zoom level, or you can enter a new scale manually, or you can just click on the arrow here and you get preset scales that you can always change in your options. And then you can, by clicking on them, you change the zoom level according to the scale. And then you have the coordinate readout. Coordinates here, of course, are linked to the default projection systems that you have here. So if you have a geographic projection system or geographic coordinate system, you will have degrees, decimal degrees here. If you have a metric or a easting and northing coordinate system, projected coordinate system, then you will have here metric coordinates. Now we are looking at the second element of the user interface, which is the table of contents. The table of contents is actually a panel, and that panel you add layers to it, and then the layers are displayed by the order that they appear. So if you add a layer and then you add another layer, the newer layer is going to cover the older layer. And then you have some buttons in the top here. The first button here will actually call the layer styling panel, where you can symbolize your layer or choose a different classification method or change the colors or the symbols of your layer. And this we are going to discuss at length later. The second button here will enable you to add a group, which sounds very similar to what you would in ArcMap. The third button is a button about managing your map themes, but the name doesn't really reflect what it can do. You can actually hide multiple layers. You can hide the selected layers, or you can display the selected layers, or you can hide the deselected layers, or display the deselected layers, and so on. So it gives you some options related to the visibility of your layer. The fourth button here enables you to filter legend by map contents. And by that, it means that if you would have a land use layer, and that land use layer has 20 layers, 20 classes in it, and in your map you have only 3 classes, like residential, commercial, administrative. If you click this button, only the classes that appear in your map will be displayed in the legend. The fifth button is the button that will enable you to filter legend by expression, which means you can remove the styles that are not there. You can actually remove them from your table of contents. Sixth button is expand all, and seventh button is collapse all. And then the eighth button is the button that will enable you to remove a layer or layers, so the selected ones. So you might select one layer, or you might select multiple layers and click this button, and then you can remove them from the table of contents. Of course, you have to note that removing the layers from the table of contents does not mean that you are deleting them from the hard disk. You're merely removing the pointer to them. Next is the browser. The browser is a third element in the user interface, and the browser acts like the Arc catalog in ArcMap window, for those of you who are familiar with ArcMap. Or it's like a Windows browser, like a regular file browser if you are using Windows, or you are a file browser if you are using Linux, which is basically it manages the files, but only the files that can be managed by QGIS. The first item in the browser is the favorites, and the favorites is a very important item because it enables you to add the folders that you are using frequently. And in this case, you don't have to drill down to the folders using the file browser every time you want to reach out and grab that shapefile or that geo package. Okay, so if you are working on a project, and that project is called is in a folder called data, and you are always going to that folder, so you might as well add it to the favorites. The second item in the browser panel is the spatial bookmarks, and this item contains two sub-items, which are the project bookmarks and the user bookmarks. The project bookmarks are local to that same project that you are working on, and the user bookmarks are common, so you can use them in other projects. So for example, if you are working for the next year in a project that covers the country of Tanzania, you could probably have some bookmarks that are user bookmarks that can be called from different project documents. So you can have different regions or different administrative divisions as bookmarks for Tanzania, and then you can call them from any other project. The third item is a project home. The project home enables you to set, by right-clicking, you can set a new folder as your project home, and then it becomes accessible from this item, which again, it's just like favorites, although favorites are common to all projects, all map documents that you are working on, but project home is only common to this particular project that you are working on. And then you have the home and the root folders, which are for the Linux system, and there are similar ones for Windows-based systems. After that, you have the databases. So you have the geo package, which is the native format of QGIS, and it's basically the equivalent of the geodatabase in ArcMap. Although it's used by other software such as ArcMap. ArcMap can read a geo package, ArcMap and ArcGIS Pro. And then you have Spatial Lite, which is the spatial version of the SQLite Lite database, which is a file-based database, not a relational database. And then you have the enterprise databases, starting by the open source PostGIS, which is based on Postgres, and then MS SQL, and then IBM's DB2. After that, you have the map services. All the remaining items are map services. So you have the web map service, you have the web map tile service, you have the web feature service, you have the web coverage service, you have the web feature service, you have the open web service, ArcGIS map server service, ArcGIS feature server service, and GeoNode service. On the top of the browser panel, you have few small buttons, 5 of them. These buttons are as follows. The first one would add the selected layer. So if you are highlighting or actually picking a layer here on this side, and you click this button, it will move to your current session. So it will be added to your current session. Of course, you can just drag that layer. So you can pick a layer from the project home, for example, a shapefile, and you can just click on it and drag it into the map canvas, and that will be it. Or you can just click on it and then click here, and it will add it to the map canvas all the same. The second button is a refresh button. So if you have done some changes, if you have added some layers to your enterprise database and they have not shown, so if you click refresh, they will refresh. The third button is a filter browser, and the filter browser, when you click on it, it's going to open a text box, and you can start writing the first characters of the name of the layers that you are looking for, and it's going to filter whatever the content in the panel here to match the initials that you have been typing. The fourth button is a collapse all button, and when you click on it, all the items here will be collapsed. And the final button is a toggle properties panel, and if you click on it, a new panel will appear, and that panel will show the properties of the folders and files. The next item in the user interface is the processing toolbox, which is basically the same as the geoprocessing toolbox in ArcMap. And that has a panel, and the panel has groups of functions. So you have cartography group of function, database group of functions, file tools group of functions, and so on. And you have an icon, a green Q icon next to all the groups that have native functions like QGIS functions. And then you have another group next to GDAL, the open source library, that groups all the functions that belongs to this group. And then you have again the function, the icon of grass, and next to the grass group of functions, and you have the saga icon next to the saga group of functions. On the top, you have an icon that resembles a clock next to recently used, and this groups all the functions that have been recently used. And on top of it, you have a search box where you can type the initial letters of the functions that you are looking for, or maybe you can type the logical name of the function that you are looking for, like dissolve or buffer, and then you will get the system will filter all the functions that matches the initial letter that you have typed here. On top, you have the processing toolbox, and that has 6 buttons. These 6 buttons are as follow. First, there is the model button. When you click on it, you can either create a model or grab an existing model. The second button is the scripts button, Python scripts, and using this button you can either create a new script or call an existing script, or create a script from template. The third button is the history button, and when you click on it, you can get access to the log of the history of processing functions that you have been using. The third button is the history button, and when you click on it, you access the log that contains the processing that you have been doing so far. And this is useful because you can recall all what you have been doing. If you have been working on an extended multi-process model, you can grab all the processes that you have been using and recreate that same procedure for another data set. And then the fourth button is the results viewer, and here when you click on it, you get the panel that will show you the results of your process. If the process outputs an HTML output, you will find it here. The fifth button is the edit features in place button, and this button will enable you to conduct processes on the layer itself. To understand what I mean by that, you have to understand that most processing functions in QGIS will generate the results in a new layer. So this one will actually create the results of your processing in the same layer. So that's the difference. Of course, it does not apply to all the functions, but rather a small set of the functions. The last button, the sixth button, is the options button, and this will give you access to change the parameters of, or the options of the processing, including the type of the file format of your raster processes, or your vector processes, the default format, and other types of options for your analysis. The fourth component of the QGIS user interface is the main menu. And the main menu is basically what you would find in any GIS package. So you have a project, an edit, a view, a layer, settings, plugins, vector, raster, database, web, mesh, processing, and help. These are the menu items. Now we are going to go over each and every one of them in detail in later lectures. The sixth element of the QGIS user interface is the collection of toolbars. Now, by default, when you install QGIS, you don't get all the toolbars open. You get only a subset of them, namely 4. So these are the 4 toolbars that are open by default when you install QGIS. The first one is the map navigation toolbar, and that has the buttons that you would expect from any GIS package. So you have a pan to selection, zoom in, a zoom out, a zoom full, a zoom to selection, a zoom to layer, a zoom to native resolution, zoom last and zoom next, new map window. Only the new map window is probably not your standard button that you would find on similar software packages. The new map window will enable you to create a number of map windows that contain the same content of your current session, but you can play with the scale. So you can have actually, if you are working on a region in a country, so you can have a new map window that contains the entire country, showing the location of that region by clicking here. And then you have a new spatial bookmark. You can create a new spatial bookmark here. You can actually show all the spatial bookmarks that you have, either local to this project or in general, by clicking on this button. And the last button is the refresh button. Next is the attributes toolbar. The attributes toolbar starts with the identify features button, and if you click on this button and you click on any element in your layer, it will show the attributes in a panel on the side that displays the values of these attributes. And then you have the run feature action button, and this is basically the button that you will click if you wanted to display a hyperlink to an element in your layer. So if you had a building photo, for example, stored on a building layer, so you click on the building and you get the photo displayed of that building. But in order to achieve that, you have to go through a procedure in order to store that action. But the button will actually run that action. Of course, it doesn't have to be a photo. It could be any attachment that is linked to a software application. So for example, you can also have a CAD drawing linked to AutoCAD. And then when you click this button and you click on the building, you get the AutoCAD drawing displayed. The third button is a select feature by area or single click. And this button, as you can see next to it, you have a small arrow. If you click on that arrow, you get different variations of the same button. So it will allow you to select features by a circle or by a polygon or by a freehand drawing. So you can actually draw a freehand around a lot of features in your layer, and then you get them selected, or you can just drag a rectangle around them or drag a circle and so on. Now the next button also is a select button. It's select features button, but it uses value, and it can do that in different ways, as you can see by the small arrow here. So you can either get the expression editor and write an expression in order to select your features, or if you click here, you can call a form, and that form will enable you to write certain values in front of the fields that are associated with the features in your layer, and then the system will select the features that match the criteria that you have written. The fifth button is a deselect features from all layers. So when you click here, you clear all the selections. The sixth button is the open attribute table. So when you click on this button, it will basically open the table of the attributes associated with the active layer. So the layer that is selected in the table of contents, when you click on this button, it will show the table of that layer. The 7th button is actually the Open Field Calculator button. And when you click on it, you open the field calculator where you can actually conduct basic calculations such as a density field. If you have a population field and an area field, you can write an expression that will divide the population by area and fill in the new field with the density values. The 8th button is the Toggle Processing Toolbox, and that's a button when you click it, it will display the processing toolbox that we have displayed before. When you click it again, it will hide that panel. The 9th button is the Show Statistical Summary, and when you click on it, it will give you a text box with a drop down. When you click on the drop down and you pick the field, and it will show the statistical summary in a panel of that field, so the mean, the standard deviation, and so on. The 10th button is the Measure Line button, and that button will enable you to measure lines. So you click on at the beginning and at the end, and it will show the distance using the units that you are using, or you can actually play around with the units here. You can also click on that small arrow here, and you get the area, the measure area button. So it will enable you to draw a line around an area, and it will give you the area in the unit that you select. Or there is another option, a third option, that will enable you to calculate the angle. The 11th button is the Show Map Tips, and that button, when you click on it, it will enable you to read the value of the elements of your layer. Of course, these values depend on your preset field that contains the value. So, for example, you can set, if you have a layer of cities, you can set the name to be the map tip display field. So when you hover over the cities, you get the name of the city displayed. Of course, you can select to have the population size of the city instead of the name, or you can select any other field that you would want to. The last button is the Text Annotation, and this button will enable you to actually write a note or write a text, whatever text that you want on the map. And you can actually play around with the shape of that box here with the leader, and that's it. The next toolbar is the project toolbar, and this is a very basic toolbar. It has a new project, and it's very clear, it's self-explanatory. When you click on it, you create a new project. The second button is Open Project. Again, it's self-explanatory. When you click on it, you open an existing project on the hard disk. The third button is Save Project, and that will enable you to save the current project. The fourth button is a new print layout, and that will enable you to open a new print layout. And we are going to go through that layout in depth later in future videos. And that basically is the place where you carry out your cartographic presentation of the map that you want to send to your reports or your posters. And then the fifth button is actually Show Layout Manager, and that will bring in the Layout Manager. And the Layout Manager is a place where you have all the print layouts stored. You might have different print layouts, so you can create a print layout for A4 size maps, a print layout for A0 size maps, a print layout for atlases, and also you can have a report. A report is also will display in the Layout Manager. And then you have the sixth and last button is for the Style Manager, and the Style Manager is a dialog box that lumps all the styles that you have, and through which you can import and export styles. The last toolbar that we explain here is the Data Source Manager toolbar, and it starts with an Open Data Source Manager button. When you click on it, you get the dialog box of the Data Source Manager. It enables you to upload any type of layer that you want, either raster or vector or text or tabular or database or enterprise database or map service. So all of them, you can open them from here. The second button is the new geopackage layer, and that button will enable you to either create a new layer in an existing geopackage or create a new geopackage altogether and create a layer inside it. The third button is a new vector layer, and that will enable you to create a new vector layer in any format that is supported by QGIS. And QGIS supports dozens of formats, including the most famous, of course, shapefile and geopackage. The fourth button will enable you to create a new layer in a spatial light database, and the fifth button will enable you to create a new temporary scratch layer. Now, this scratch layer will disappear as soon as you close your map document or project. If you do not save it, you have to store it. In order to store it, you right click it and make it permanent, or you right click it and save as. The sixth and the last button is a new virtual layer button, and you create a new virtual layer by writing an expression to select a subset of an existing layer. For example, you can select all the elements in parcel database that have land use as residential, and you can store them as a virtual layer. The explanation that I have just made for the components of QGIS interface was only theoretical using Google Slides, but future videos will take all these components and go into detail using an actual data set that I'm going to combine, put together, and make available for any of you guys who want to do the same exercises with me as I go along. Thank you for joining me, and have a great day.